Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive today? We're going to be talking about internationalism, but maybe not how you usually think about it. We're going deep on how power really works globally, especially for movements trying to make social change.
Yeah, and what I find so interesting is this paper we're looking at, it doesn't just talk theory, it goes way back in history, to figure out why even the international movements that seem successful, like maybe they missed something big.
Okay, so let's get into it. We're looking at Cómo construir el internacionalismo del siglo SI, which translates to how to build 21st century internationalism. And right off the bat, they make this bold statement. Even huge revolutions like Mexico's, the Sandinistas, they were fighting capitalism, imperialism, the whole deal, but they still missed a huge chance.
Right, and that chance, at least according to this paper, was to create this truly united global front, especially when it comes to worker movements. Think about it. While you had revolutionaries in Latin America fighting for freedom, a lot of worker movements, say, in Europe and the U.S., they were, well, understandably focused on their own issues closer to home.
So they were pushing for better conditions where they were, but not always connecting that to what was happening under colonial rule in other parts of the world.
Exactly. It's like the paper saying, even with good intentions, these movements didn't totally get how interconnected everything is globally. Like exploitation somewhere else. That props up a system that can never be truly fair, even in your own backyard, right? And that critique, the paper says, well, it matters a lot to how we approach internationalism today.
It's so true. We're still having these conversations, aren't we? Globalization, labor rights in different countries.
Yeah.
It's always this tension between what's local and how to be in solidarity globally.
Absolutely. And the paper doesn't shy away from what happens because of that disconnect, even linking it to, get this, the rise of guerrilla warfare. It's like they're saying that was a last resort when international support for these movements just dwindled.
Yeah.
So building on all that history, the paper goes into two big 21st century developments.
Yeah.
The rise of leaders like Hugo Chavez in Latin America, and this one might surprise you, the whole WikiLeaks thing.
Now, on the surface, those seem completely unrelated. I mean, one's about regional power, the other's about government secrets. How does the paper connect them?
Well, it argues that both of those things challenged U.S. dominance, just in totally different ways. So you've got Latin American countries pushing for regional integration, directly going against U.S. influence. And then, bam, WikiLeaks comes along, exposing all this, frankly, messy stuff about U.S. foreign policy, the surveillance programs, all of it.
And the backlash was pretty immediate in both cases. We saw the U.S. actively working to undermine those Latin American governments. And then there's Julian Assange hit with espionage charges. That whole international manhunt felt like a very clear message about what happens when you mess with the status quo.
You said it. And the paper, it suggests this backlash wasn't just about, staying in charge. It was a sign of this shift toward a sneakier kind of control. Less about using brute force and more about manipulation, censorship, that kind of thing.
And that's where Matt Taibbi's work becomes really important, right? He really exposed what was going on at Twitter, and, well, it wasn't good.
That's putting it lightly. Taibbi showed this massive effort to control what people were saying, what they were seeing online. We're talking Twitter, Facebook, Google, all of them, working with government agencies to straight up censor some voices and boost others.
And this wasn't just about, like, taking down offensive memes or anything. This was about suppressing real information.
Yeah.
Stuff about war, about the government doing shady things, even corporate influence on elections. Important stuff.
Absolutely. And the paper's blunt about it, calling it a global censorship apparatus, an instrument of social control. Like, they don't hold back. It's clear they think this is really dangerous, especially if you want to challenge those in power.
And it goes beyond governments, too, right? The paper points to huge corporations, Amazon, Google, these giants are playing a major role.
That's key. The paper's argument is that these companies aren't just businesses anymore. The power they have rivals, sometimes even beats, that of entire nations. Think about it. They control how things are made, how we consume things. And now, with all this data they collect, all that targeted advertising, they have this massive influence on public opinion, even on elections.
Yeah, and it's no secret how corporations influence policy, right?
Yeah.
Throwing money at lobbying efforts, funding think tanks, basically buying lawmakers. But the paper goes deeper, talking about how they manipulate what the public thinks on this massive scale.
And this is where it gets really wild and a little scary. They use the example of Brazil's Supreme Court, how they try to put some limits on X, what used to be Twitter. The backlash was instant. intense. The paper says it wasn't just people being mad, but like a coordinated thing fueled by these corporate interests. They use sophisticated data to basically manipulate how the public felt about it.
So they knew exactly how to get people riled up, what stories to push to make the court back down.
Exactly. And that's where the paper brings in this idea of, get this, psychographic profiling.
Oh, okay.
You remember that whole Cambridge Analytica thing?
Yeah, vaguely.
Well, the paper's saying that was just the beginning. Like,
Yeah.
we're talking companies having access to tons of data about how we act online, our personalities, even our deepest fears, what we really want.
Hold up. That sounds like, I don't know, some dystopian sci-fi movie, but it's real. They can actually predict how we'll react to information, influence how we vote, what we're going to BUY.
That's what they're claiming. It's pretty chilling when you think about it. The paper uses the term data sovereignty, basically meaning, you're in control of your own information.
Yeah.
And they're saying the more data these companies get, the less sovereignty we actually have. Think about it. Someone can figure out exactly how you'll behave, how free are you really?
That's, wow, kind of scary when you put it that way.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about, like, getting targeted ads anymore, is it? The paper is saying this affects huge international relations stuff.
Yeah.
That old school diplomacy is practically useless with this level of data manipulation going on.
Right. It's fascinating, but also kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
How do you negotiate with an algorithm, right? How do you fight back against a campaign designed to use your fears against you when you don't even know it's happening?
It's like someone changed the rules of the game, but they forgot to tell us. So if traditional internationalism, all that stuff about worker solidarity, fighting imperialism, it's not enough to counter this new kind of power.
Yeah.
What does 21st century internationalism even look like?
Yeah, the paper doesn't give us easy answers, but they do offer a kind of roadmap. They say we need to really get into how this new power structure works. And they say a good place to start is with a deep dive into firms like Cambridge Analytica and what they're doing, especially in the global south.
Because that's where a lot of this data collecting, all the manipulation, it's happening there, right? Places with, I don't know, less regulation, maybe.
Exactly. The paper argues that to fight back, we have to understand how these companies work, how they get this data, how they weaponize it, all of it. And they point to investigations that have already happened. The British Parliament, the U.S. Congress, the EU, they've all looked into this. Those are valuable starting points, they say.
So we're talking about digging into those records, seeing what methods they used, who was involved, almost like creating a playbook of how this manipulation works.
Exactly. And they go even further, calling for a global effort to create some kind of common framework for dealing with this. They specifically mention Venezuela, Brazil, Bolivia. They've all dealt with these issues in different ways. The paper suggests their experiences could help shape a broader Latin American agenda for, data sovereignty, fighting online manipulation.
So it's like they're calling for everyone to team up to recognize this isn't just a problem for one country or another. It needs a coordinated global response.
Yeah, definitely. But it goes beyond just policy recommendations. The paper's asking for a fundamental shift in how we think about internationalism in this digital age. Like, we need to move past those old ideas of solidarity based on just where you are or what you believe, and really get a deeper understanding of how power works in a world increasingly ruled by algorithms and data flows.
So less about workers of the world uniting, more about, everyone who's part of this digital world recognizing that we're all vulnerable to this and finding ways to take back control of our data, our privacy, our democracies.
Exactly. And the paper suggests that's the big challenge for internationalism in the 21st century.
That's a tall order. But they do offer a little bit of hope. The paper argues that being transparent is one of the best ways to fight this kind of manipulation. They specifically call for creating independent international groups whose whole job is to watch elections, expose these tactics.
Because you know what they say, sunlight's the best disinfectant. It seems like they believe that shining a light on these practices, making sure the public can see them, that's crucial to stopping them from working.
So make the playbook public, show everyone how they're being manipulated, and suddenly it's not so effective anymore. But that means we need a level of transparency, of accountability that, well, these companies aren't exactly known for.
That's putting it mildly. This isn't about just passing a few laws or creating some new agency. We're talking about really rethinking how power works in a world dominated by tech and figuring out how to hold these new power players accountable.
Honestly, this has been, I don't know, kind of intense, right? Fascinating stuff, but it also makes you wonder if there's any point in even trying to fight back if it's all as rigged as they're saying.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But even though the paper doesn't offer, a simple solution, it does end on, I guess you could say, a hopeful note.
Oh, what do they say?
They seem to think that if we can wrap our heads around how this new power structure works, if we can expose these tactics, really bring them out into the open, and if we work together across borders, across those old ways of thinking, then we can start to take back some control, build something more democratic.
So it's a call to action then, not to give up, but to get informed, get organized, and demand better.
Absolutely.
Holy.
And maybe, just maybe, by shining a light on all this shady stuff, making it impossible to ignore,
Yeah.
we can actually start writing a new chapter in that fight for a more just world.
I like the sound of that. And on that note, we'll leave you with something to think about. If what we're talking about is true, all this data, all this manipulation, these corporations with so much influence, what does it mean for the future of democracy, as we've always understood it? And more importantly, what part are WE going to play as citizens of this increasingly interconnected world in shaping that future? Something to chew on. Until next time, keep those questions coming, keep learning, keep diving deep.